what is coming. They know you will be its herald. Let go of hope.
Dude, do you know what made me drink the most was like BF8 beta? You know that? It's not surprising that like Shadowlands beta just like ramped that up more on me. Okay. Fuck Shadowlands. We'll just think of what's now. What's now is, can we make single target 100 surrender happen here? Just drop it! I couldn't do the debuff. Dude, I couldn't do the debuff, but the buff was fucking amazing. Hey, what's up, Void Lords and Masters of the Universe? So, I'm convinced that we are the Void Lords of Azeroth. The WoW players are, not just the Shadow Priests. But we get a tough topic today, man. Alright, so if you're watching this, you're either morbidly curious, or you're struggling with this decision on should I quit WoW. Maybe you have a friend that's like struggling, I don't know. Like, I just showed you a bunch of horrid stories of we're up to millions of WoW players that at one point in their history they ran into a crossroads where they're like, gee, is this the time I need to quit WoW or not? And maybe you're not there yet. Maybe you're one of the morbidly curious. I'm gonna tell you, no matter where you are on the spectrum right now, there will be a day that you're gonna have to quit WoW. Because it's just statistically the way it's gonna be, alright? So, there's a bunch of different reasons why people are gonna end up quitting WoW today, tomorrow, years from now, a decade from now, whatever. And, because we've seen it over the past decade, right? Plenty of people have quit WoW, and plenty of people have come back to the game and then quit again. And everybody's story is a little bit different. Different flavors of ice cream, if you will. But there's a bunch of different common themes, and I can almost boil it down to like a few, or like less than a handful. So, life balance is one of them. Burnout is another. Game design is another big one. that's a huge one, especially lately in the past couple years, but that's been going on since Wrath of the Lich King. And the last one is other game hype. I mean, I haven't really seen anyone jump out of WoW for a new MMO, because the market has just been kind of lacking anything exciting for years. But back in the day, used to be like back in Wrath of the Lich King, oh, we're gonna quit for Rift, or Cataclysm. And later on it was Star Wars, and then there was WildStar. So game hype was part of WoW's history. It would pull people out of the game for the next best thing. But I think as the game has aged, people don't really... I haven't really noticed a lot of people quitting WoW because of hype anymore of another game. It tends to be the previous categories. And I think that's mostly because there's really serious lack of competition for WoW. And that's a hard fact at this point. Obviously, I'm playing Final Fantasy these days. We're not here to really talk about Final Fantasy, but Final Fantasy is the only real big contender competing with WoW right now, and it tends to be the default for players that happen to be quitting because of things like game design, or they just can't find a home in WoW anymore for different reasons. But if somebody quit over life balance, sometimes it's a blended answer. So I want to go over some of the stuff today, and we'll deep dive some of it, but the idea here is to help you figure out where are you in this basket of problems. And you have to weigh this out. Like, am I still able to play WoW, or is it time for me to quit? And I'm gonna like boil this down. You can like skip right to the end. The answer is gonna be, is the fun gonna outweigh, you know, all the bullshit going on in the game? And everyone's gonna have their own breaking point where the scales just tip too far this way. But what I find interesting in this equation is it doesn't have to go this far to make you quit. It has to go this far to make you quit because of the investment piece of this. Player investment in our characters and our accounts make it so we're really not likely to quit the game even when we should quit the game. So everyone tends to, can't say everyone, but the majority of players, we've been dedicated for so long that you're just not going to quit on the drop of a hat. Not typically anyway. There's exceptions to every rule though. So I'm going to go over, you know, those big categories and some of the little stuff that kind of like spins off of this, and talk about them briefly and see what I can do to help you untangle the rat's nest of issues that you might have to see should you play Shadowlands or not, or if you are going to already play it, what you might expect to find a year in or 2 years in. So far, me personally, I have, outside of Shadow Priest, I mean game-wide, I'm predicting a BFA 2.0. I don't think the TikTok is going to work this time around. I think that they should have delayed the expansion and they didn't. I'm not the only one that feels that way. But let's just talk about the high bullet points here, just to help you figure this out for yourself. And it's very much an individual decision. I can promise you something. It will be the hardest thing you ever do if you quit. Do not take the decision lightly. There's nothing but grief waiting for you on the other side of this decision. So let's get into it and think about how these things are weighing on the scale for you, and understand it's not going like this before you quit. You have to go like this before you quit, because the grass isn't greener. It's not even about that. It's about whether or not you can keep investing into the game and have fun. So let's get into it. Alright, so let's go into all of the equation, right? What's going to be this side of the scale and this side of the scale, and then you can kind of figure out where you're at. So there's the 5 major categories that I pegged as like the big reasons for quitting, but they all kind of dovetail in. My old boss used to say that all the time, dovetail. I don't know where he gets it from, but whatever. But the intertwine, so I'm just going to make a big list of all the specifics to kind of talk about. So on the negative side, or the rat's nest issues, okay, is, I'm just going to blow through these. So in the design of the game, developers are constantly trying to solve player problems. That could be, hey, my spec doesn't have burst. Hey, I suck in Mythic Plus. A lot of these things, Shadow was poster child about these, but every spec is facing some of these things. PvP balance issues, things like that. And, you know, so again, so problem solving versus, which is what the devs are, that's their job, right? They're making the specs and they want to solve problems. That's all I've seen them do for the past like two years, and that's all I've seen them do in the Shadowlands beta. They're just solving problems. Even their feature of Covenants was, in my opinion, designed to solve the problem of people quitting the game because it no longer offered RPG and meaningful choice, and they went and played Final Fantasy. So they developed Covenants to solve a problem, to bring that stuff back into the game. The problem is, the solution isn't fun. So, the issue is, let's solve problems, right? But it cost us fun. Well, what the fuck? Like, that's a problem. Like, now we have a new problem. The game's not fun. So, solving problems versus fun and diversity in the game, because we saw a lot of issues with specs getting homogenized because everybody's solved to eventually do all the same shit, so they're really kind of bland. So that's the next bullet point, is homogenized specs. And again, a lot of what drives that is the metas themselves, leading into player spec envy, and now I want to be like, I want to have what that guy has. So then they give that spec those things, but now they're like, what? They're the same. Okay, they're just like, okay, they're aesthetically different, and a few like sprinkles of like, you know, sprinkles on the sundae to make them different. So now all the specs are sort of like just skin deep. You might as well just be, you know, screwing a supermodel instead of like finding a legit girl with like, I don't know, whatever. I digress. So those are kind of interrelated things. The next thing is borrowed power versus class and spec design. So they know that they have this problem, sort of. At least the class design, right? So in the Shadowlands, they gave us, again, back to solving problems. Let's give us class design. So they gave us like old spells back, but they're shallow. Here's a couple keybinds that do nothing, and nothing feels good. It's just like, okay, we have this spell and that spell back, but it is not necessarily more fun. In some cases, it's good enough for some people, don't get me wrong. But they really lacked, there's so much more they could have done with the specs and the class design, and they didn't do it because they spent all of the time doing borrowed power, which was another solution to a problem, which I already mentioned, Covenants. So, the classes and the specs are basically homogenized, and they're just shells of their former selves, and again, you might still find fun in them, but it's gonna get tougher and tougher and tougher, and that's why I think we're finding, you know, the fringe cases, the players like myself, and maybe some of you that are watching, that are kind of just screwed. We're like, oh, we don't like that, so now what do we do? But anyway, so borrowed power at the expense of class and spec design, and they're at odds with each other, and I'm not the only one saying this, so don't take my word for it. Lack of meaningful choice. They know they have this problem. They tried to bring it back in Covenant design. The issue is it's borrowed power, and players just don't care about it, because it's going to be gone in a couple of years. It doesn't feel intrinsic to, like, the priest that I was playing. It's like a bolt-on, it's like a strap-on. Do I dare say it? Okay, it's like a strap-on, just go with it. It's dull, it's like nothing, it's not real. Like, okay. God, did I really just make that joke? Okay, moving on. Alright, so we already talked about specs feeling hollow, so I kind of put this as a separate bullet point, but cookie cutter builds, they're so, like, just cookie cutter that, is this an MMO at this point? Is it an RPG at this point? And Ian even was quoted saying this, so I know they get it. But why isn't it in the game? Like, everything's just the same. Anyway, whatever. Shallow is going to equal boring, and if it's not boring for you now, like the new Shadow Priest design, give it a patch or two, or a year. And then when you, like, say, hey, I don't want to play Priest anymore for some reason, and you go to reroll into something else and you realize it's exactly the same. So all these things are intertwined with each other for sure. But that's going to lead to boredom, because now there's not another spec in the game that you can go play. Which is why I'm now out of the game, because I ran out of stuff that I like to play. The other thing on this list, endless grinds. So they are tackling that in Shadowlands. We'll see how that plays out. But if it's not in-your-face grind, it's gonna still be in the game. Like, they still have Renowned. They still have, you know, and I'm gonna just say the next few bullet points because it really tacks on shit on top of shit. Mandatory unfun content and mandatory crossover content, which you may or may not find fun, but even if you do find fun, like I like PvP, but I don't usually want or have like the time I want to put into it. So if you're a raider, you also have to PvP if you want to be super competitive and have all the shit. And then same thing with like Mythic Plus, you have to do Mythic Plus if you really want to min-max all your stuff and feel like really good in the game. So now it becomes overwhelming, and that becomes an issue with things like balancing real life, right? So you either have to accept being slightly scrub, a slight scrub, or just say fuck it and quit. So some people just tap out because they feel like, you know, back in the day we spilled a basically raid log, maybe like get caught, like do our dungeon or do our badges and then log out, like back in Wrath of the Lich King and stuff. And then the people that were really excited about the game used to just have alts, would be on like multiple raid teams or something. That's what I used to do. But it gives people that run into work-life balance issues an opportunity to like just play like 3 days a week. Hey, I raid for 3 days, or you know, I raid for 2 and do my other shit on the 3rd day. But anyway, let's keep going. I want to spend more time on some other things. So, the other thing is MMOs by design are more rewarding the more you play them. By design, they're supposed to be. That's a thing. I think what's happened to WoW over time, though, it just goes way too far, which is what I was just talking about with the, you know, endless grinds and the mandatory content, and the crossover content. But that leads into my next point: investment. So the more you play, the more it's harder to just go quit and play something else. Like, what if you were interested in Final Fantasy, you want to go play Final Fantasy? You know, like, when Shadowlands comes out, you're gonna be behind in WoW because you're gonna try to go play Final Fantasy for 1 or 2 days a week, and you're gonna feel like shit. Unless you don't have a job and you can play all day and all night. But now you run into the work-life balance thing, or like game balance, whatever, life balance. So that investment really comes into play that most people can't play both MMOs, and they're gonna have to decide on one or the other. You can't overlap them for too long. Most people can't. So the last thing on this list is, or this top part of this list here, is going to be player frustration. Where are you at on frustration? And of all those things above. That is up for you to decide. Then, now what I'm going to tell you is, you have to decide all this stuff, right? You have to weigh that out to what's left in the game. If none of that affected you, then it's not gonna be that hard to like have the good stuff outweigh it, right? But if it's really like screwing you up, then you're gonna be in trouble. So the counterbalance to the side of the equation is, how much fun, actual fun, are you still having? So for me, I played BFA. BFA was a shitty expansion. 8.0 and 8.1 was complete garbage. But I did enough beta testing to know once we got secondary stats, it would be fun again. They wouldn't leave it as bad as it was in 8.0, and they didn't. They fixed it. 8.2 was great. I liked 8.2 personally. I loved 8.2. I loved 8.3. And I'm glad I played BFA for that, but I wasn't too happy I had to wait 12 months for that. So you have to figure that out. How much fun is left? And try to look ahead into the future. What if there's something you need changed? What's the chances of it going to happen inside of the Shadowlands development cycle? Or, I'm sorry, Shadowlands life cycle. They're not going to overhaul a spec, right? They're not going to, you know, drastically change the game. The most they're going to do is inject a ridiculous amount of systems to try to fix any problems that they have with Covenants. So, I'm honestly predicting a BFA 2.0 almost to the T. They're probably going to have to pull the ripcord, and then they're going to inject all kinds of bullshit, and it'll probably be like 9.1 or 9.2, and it's going to be like how 8.2 saved BFA. Do you want to go through that again? And depending on how you like the rework and you like the specs available, all that bullshit I just listed, for me, it very quickly became, nah, I'm just totally screwed. But try to look ahead. What can change? If you're not having a lot of fun now, is there a good chance that what you need will show up later in the future? There are some good things in Shadowlands. The tier sets, the loot is better, the cash is better. So I do think frustration should be a little bit better in some areas. They have spent a lot of time problem solving. What you have to be careful about, and this is Blizzard all the time, right? They solved this, this, and this, but what side effects are there going to be, and how do they affect you as a player? In my case, they made the game unplayable. I would take 8.2 and 8.3 any day of the week, or anything in Legion. And I'm not going further back than that because it gets complicated, because it was so long ago. The other thing is, friends and guild do matter in this equation. A lot of people on my stream had asked me, you know, well, what about you just quit because what about your friends, and what about your guild? You know, you tell me you just played WoW for Voidform Shadow Priest, and I'm like, well, no, it's about the package, right? But the package is these things, and unfortunately, if I didn't have a base spec I could stomach, then the friends and guild piece didn't matter anymore to me. It got so far this way that this side of the equation was like, no. It became they couldn't carry the burden of making the game fun for me anymore. So the last thing is investment. We are invested into our accounts and into our characters, and that has some weight to it to counterbalance some negatives. Like, I put up with 8.0 and 8.1 for 12 months because of things like friends, guild, the investment into my character, and the fun I knew would be there. I had total faith in secondary stats. I expected it to be 8.1 and not 8.2, but you know, at least there was hope. So I highly suggest you go through similar thought processes depending on how you feel today and looking forward into the future. I can tell you it would be pretty devastating if you don't like what you're playing, your guild sucks, and your friends are quitting, and all kinds of other shit happening. Then I would start really acknowledging the fact that it might be your time to quit too, if you can't counterbalance all the stuff going on. So why don't we talk about that next, right? What in the world you have to face when you get to where I'm at. So it is the hardest thing anyone's gonna deal with. And it's funny because you'll never see it coming. It's a video game, right? How bad can it be, right? If you've been playing WoW for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, you might not realize what you have until you've lost it. I mean, I knew what I was gonna face, but I even underestimated it. You get attached to it no different than you get attached to your pets or your job, and if you lose those things, even if they were cancer, even if you had a dog that bit you, and you had a boss that yelled at you, and you have to quit your job to get a new job, it still sucks in a big way, no matter what. So the loss, you're gonna feel it. If you've, depending on how much you played WoW, and if you're gonna quit, it's depending on how much investment you're walking away from, and how much it changes your life, is how much it's gonna impact you. And in the extreme cases, I can tell you, it was rough on me. I think you saw, right? And it will be. But I can say, it was the right decision for me personally. But I can't claim that it's the right decision for you. You got to think ahead. It may be Shadowlands will be like, for you, how BFA was for me. I was glad I played BFA, even though it was the shittiest expansion in modern times. Alright. So, do you quit WoW? Do you break up? Do you leave the abusive relationship that you're in? It's almost like that kind of an equation. You know, the type of decision that you'll wrestle with it, and have all kinds of anxiety about a decision. What I can tell you is, you know, be aware the grief that's waiting for you on the other side of the fence. Even if you decide to do something like I did and play Final Fantasy, like, or millions, at least 1 million players have done so. Final Fantasy is a fun game. It's definitely the go-to if you find yourself with no other options, but it's not a grass greener thing. It's like when you need to break up with Blizzard and you can't play their game anymore for this reason, and now you need to, you're a gamer, right? I'm a gamer. I had to replace it with something. And, you know, in my case with Final Fantasy, I was actually, like, very impressed with the game. I wasn't interested in it. We're not going to talk about Final Fantasy that much here. I really don't want to. Make the decision as if Final Fantasy or other options don't exist. Just figure out, is WoW worth your time? It's an MMO, it requires a lot of your time, a lot of your efforts, and don't forget, like, if your ass isn't on fire in an MMO, you're not going to be competitive. So if competition means a lot to you, you're going to probably run into an issue if you don't have that fire behind playing the game. It'll start to affect your performance, and a few tiers down the road, you might burn out so quickly that you barely can give your guild any notice. I've seen guildies quit almost at the drop of a hat on an end boss because they weren't weighing this out, or they were in denial about this equation until it totally wrecked them mid-expansion. And it really sucks to quit mid-expansion because now you're like got that guilt of screwing over your raid team or your friends or your Mythic Plus team or whatever it is. So think ahead a little bit, and I think maybe the last statement I'll make is this. If there's any time to quit WoW, you know, the other swing side, if there's any time to quit WoW, this is it. The tide is turning right now. The player base is moody, pissy. We just went through BFA. Nobody's got any patience anymore about anything in the whole community. Like, I figure half the player base is just got a huge chip on their shoulder because we just were abused by BFA, and players take it out on each other and the devs, and even if they quit like me, we still do. So, why not take a break? Like, maybe that can help push you go the other way. You know, I can't claim to know where you're at, but if there's a time to quit WoW, this is it. Because the message will be clear to Blizzard. Stop with the borrowed power. Give us a fun game. What the fuck? It should be fun. I'm gonna put on the screen here. Fun. No one's gonna quit over a small problem that they didn't solve. But we are gonna quit when it's not fun enough to put the fire under our ass to make us try hard. Right? Anyway. So is it fun or not? If it's not fun, then quit. If it's fun, then play it. And, you guys can follow me on Twitch if you want and, watch me wipe in Final Fantasy. I die on every boss. Okay, later.
Is the infinite truths. Gaze deep into shadow. Stare into the void. Here, every vision shall be made real.